For centuries, the Maya survived drought, war, and political chaos. Then, in less than a lifetime, their greatest cities fell silent. They built urban centers that rose above the jungle canopy, crowned with pyramids aligned to the movements of Venus. Their astronomers tracked eclipses with remarkable precision, and their kings carved dynasties into stone to outlast memory itself. Yet within a few generations, many of those southern cities were abandoned. They were not erased in a single night, nor destroyed by one decisive invasion. They were gradually left behind. What could drive one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the Americas to walk away from its own monuments? The Maya had endured drought and war before. Why did the system fail this time? To understand what actually collapsed, we have to begin at their height. Because the ending only makes sense once we see how high they climbed. By the 7th and 8th centuries, cities like Tikal and Calakmul were not merely prosperous. They were locked in intense rivalry. Each was ruled by a king who claimed divine lineage, and divine lineage demanded visible proof. Victories were carved into stone because memory was political. If one ruler failed to record dominance, another would. Prestige was not decorative, it was stabilizing. Authority depended on it. Thus, expansion became necessity rather than ambition. Monuments grew taller, wars produced captives, and agricultural land expanded outward to support swelling populations. The system rewarded growth, and it offered little incentive for restraint. For generations, this competitive order held together. However, stability built on constant expansion leaves little room for contraction. Around the 9th century, rainfall patterns across the southern lowlands became increasingly unstable. Multi-year droughts struck a civilization structured around predictable wet and dry cycles. Unlike societies sustained by massive rivers, the Maya depended heavily on stored rainwater. Reservoirs collected seasonal rainfall and sustained cities through dry months. When rainfall declined, reserves diminished. As reserves diminished, harvests became unreliable. Therefore, confidence in divine kingship began to erode. If a ruler speaks for the gods and the sky remains empty, doubt spreads quickly. Yet drought alone does not dismantle a civilization. The Maya had endured dry periods before. This time, however, drought intersected with an already strained landscape. For generations, forests had been cleared for agriculture and construction. Wood fueled lime kilns that produced the plaster covering temples and palaces. Expanding fields exposed soil to erosion and gradually reduced fertility. In addition, deforestation altered local moisture cycles, making rainfall patterns less stable over time. As yields declined, more land had to be cleared to compensate, which in turn intensified environmental stress. Meanwhile, warfare escalated between rival cities. Fortifications began appearing where open ceremonial spaces once stood. Mass graves became more common, and inscriptions shifted tone, moving from confident celebration toward defensive justification. Food insecurity, military pressure, and political fragility increasingly reinforced one another. What emerged was not sudden chaos, but accumulating strain. Each stress alone might have been survivable. Together, they began to erode resilience. Across the 9th century, major southern cities began to empty in stages. Construction slowed, temples remained unfinished, and new monuments ceased to appear. At Kapan, the final recorded date stands like a closing mark carved into stone. After it, silence. There is no universal destruction layer across the region, and no single battlefield that explains everything. Instead, archaeological evidence points toward gradual departure, communities relocated, stone endured. Thus, the image of sudden annihilation gives way to something quieter and more complex. At this point, a common misconception begins to unravel. The Maya did not disappear. In the northern Yucatan, cities such as Chichén Itzá rose in prominence even as southern centers declined. Trade networks shifted, political organization evolved, and power decentralized. What ended was not a people, but a political order built on divine kingship, competitive monument building, and ecological intensity. The Maya possessed extraordinary intellectual achievements. The Dresden Codex preserves detailed astronomical calculations of remarkable precision. Ignorance was not the weakness, interdependence was. Political authority relied on divine credibility. Food production relied on environmental stability. Environmental stability depended partly on intact forests. Warfare disrupted trade networks that might otherwise have buffered shortages. As environmental stress increased, those connections transformed from strengths into vulnerabilities. The system did not collapse in a dramatic explosion. Rather, it gradually lost coherence. By the end of the 9th century, many southern cities were largely empty. The jungle advanced, monuments remained, and Maya communities continued in new forms. Therefore, the collapse of the classic Maya was not a singular catastrophic event. It was the erosion of resilience within a highly complex system facing overlapping pressures. They had survived drought before and endured warfare before. What changed was the convergence of stresses within a structure optimized for continuous growth. Collapse does not require ignorance. It requires complexity pushed beyond its capacity to adapt. In the end, the stones were never the civilization, the people were. And when the structure binding them together ceased to function effectively, they reorganized without it.